Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. So I think we've established by now that I love to travel, and I know the topic of travel and vacations are a little uncertain right now, especially depending on where you live and the restrictions, but I've definitely just noticed here in the Okanagan that people are traveling again, myself included. A couple weeks ago I went to a Soyuz. Next week I'm going to do some camping near Seminarm, and in August I'm going to be in Victoria for a couple weeks. So I really wanted to do a video sharing with you some photography tips that I think can be applied to both travel but also staycations in your own hometown. So let's get into it. Consider having a rough idea of why you're taking the photos, because I think it'll impact what you take the photos of. Are you posting to Instagram? Are you just trying to document your journey as a whole for memory keepsake? Are you going to write a book or put an article together? I think doing this just gives your mind ideas then of what you need to photograph. When I went to a Soyuz, the photos that I took on that trip were vastly different than the photos I took when I went to Greece, when I went to Denver or Vancouver. And that's because the reasoning behind the trips were very different. The photos I took in those previous trips, I was more creating and taking the photos for social media, having photos to post to social media, to Facebook, to Instagram, versus when I went to a Soyuz, I wasn't even really thinking about social media. I wanted to craft a story about my time in a Soyuz with my family, so I have a lot more context shots versus just like those constant front-facing photos to post to social media. So for me, having a rough idea of why I'm taking these photos really helped inform my idea of what I need to take photos of. But I think there is this fine line between being too narrow and focused on what you're taking the photos of and why you're taking them, and being too broad that you end up taking photos of too many random things that when you're curating and kind of going through all of your photos afterwards, it's difficult to figure out what kind of gets edited or what goes into like the final edit pile and what doesn't. Slow your pace. I'm notorious for trying to cram too many activities into a day. I really find that tends to happen when I have a shorter trip and I'm just trying to cram everything into kind of that weekend trip. So I have to remember to tell myself not to cram too many activities into a day, because one, it just makes the trip less enjoyable, less relaxing, and when you're trying to also photograph the trip, you just feel like you're constantly on the go with all of the different activities that you're doing, that you don't really have any time to like marinate and think about everything that you're doing and really enjoy the moment. So I find the sweet spot for me is kind of one major activity in the morning, one major activity in the afternoon, and then anything outside of that are just kind of like bonuses from the day. Sometimes you might have to think outside the box a little. I knew when I was going to a Soyuz, it was going to be a little bit more difficult for me to take photos because I was traveling with other people. I wasn't able to stop the car and pull over whenever I wanted to take a photo of something. I wasn't able to take my sweet time at a location. So I had to come up with an idea of how to photograph the outdoors, where we were going, the journey, from the parameters that I was working with. And that's where I started to actually take photos of the outdoors, the landscape, where we were going, through inside the vehicle. So I ended up using kind of the windows, the windshield from inside the vehicle to frame my subject outdoors. And it actually became one of my favorite ways to kind of document the trip. And so I kind of added that kind of technique to like my photography toolbox. Make sure to capture those candid moments. It's great getting those like front-facing portrait style photos of your family, of yourselves, but don't forget to get those candid moments, those small times of a genuine smile, of a genuine laugh or a moment. So what I was doing to make sure that I can capture those genuine moments is anytime I was at a place, I would just leave my camera on my lap on, and I would make sure that the settings of the camera were at what was appropriate for the environment we were in. So when the moment happened, I was able to quickly capture it and have that candid moment for the photos afterwards. Try going simple. I know this tip is a little bit subjective, but I do really want you to consider going simple with your gear. If you already know why you're taking the photos, roughly what you're going to be taking the photos of, then you already kind of know what lenses you're going to want to bring with you. On the trip to a Soyuz, I only photographed with the 25mm, and it was partly because I was still working on the one lens challenge for June. But I find that, with the small compact setup, I was able to bring my camera everywhere with me. It wasn't too too heavy or bulky that I was leaving it behind in the hotel room. And you know that if you've watched any of my Olympus videos that I went with Olympus because they have one of the most lightweight compact systems, and I never wanted that to happen to me where the system was too bulky and heavy that I left it behind instead of bringing it with me. Have enough memory and battery. When we were in Vancouver last year, I made the mistake of only having like 2 smallish SD cards, and what ended up happening is I was taking photos at the Capilano Suspension Bridge and I ran out of memory. So I ended up having to delete photos that were like repeats or bad ones on the go. So just do yourself a favor, have enough SD cards and batteries. Back up your photos. At the end of every day when I was in Soyuz, I basically took the photos that were on my SD card and I backed it up to my hard drive because I brought my laptop and my hard drive with me. And then at the end of the trip, I took all of those photos again and I put it on my backup hard drive. So I actually had 3 copies of the photos, but just kind of find a system that works for you and back up your photos. Practice locally first. So David Duchemin once did this podcast episode about becoming. You are becoming that person to take that photo, write that book, become that person. So when you practice locally and you experiment with different compositions and techniques, you are basically building this toolbox that when you're traveling, you just have more freedom to pull from that toolbox and create the photo that you envision. So those are my photography tips for your next trip or staycation. Leave me a comment below on what your favorite travel photography tip is. I really hope you enjoyed today's video and found it useful. If you did, then hit that like button and subscribe. Maybe buy me a cup of coffee, and I'll see you in the next one.